This is going to be the ultimate guide on how to get hit level 3 fire resistance the most efficient way possible, the best in slot way. I asked you guys if you would care about it and you guys said yes, you were interested in hearing about it, so why do we have to make this video? The problem is that in my opinion Blizzard has majorly screwed up the fire resistance values of the tier 1 set. If you were to build full tier 1, you would be screwed, you wouldn't have enough fire resistance even if you stacked a bunch of rings and stuff to get to the cap. As you guys know, you gotta hit 226 fire resistance to not get one shot by hit. Now, if you are a tank, it is not a huge deal. I mean, you might suffer a little on the threat department, but for the most part, if you're in a fight that requires you to be literally fire resistance capped, that's pretty much all the mitigation you need. You're not gonna get one shot if you're wearing a bunch of crappy greens as long as you're capped on fire resistance. But if you're a DPS or a healer, that means your performance in the raid is gonna be a lot worse. And since Blizzard has yet to buff the tier 1 set, even though I really think they should at this point, maybe put an 8-piece tier bonus or something like that, our only hope is to mismatch gears. So I am gonna show you for every type of armor what is the most efficient way to do so. First of all, I am gonna have a controversial take over here. I do agree that to hit 226 fire resistance, you probably shouldn't need to get a totem for it. Because you never know when you're gonna get out of range of the totem, or what if the shaman dies, you die, so that's no fun. That is too much of a liability. If you were like a top of the run speed running guild, you know, you're going for the world record, okay, you might justify going for that strategy of like being under the cap and using a totem, but for a normal raid, that is not acceptable. All it takes is one mistake and you can potentially wipe your raid. That is just not gonna fly. However, I will make one caveat. I do think it is acceptable to count on one buff. Gift of the Wild is gonna give you 27 fire resistance. That is more or less an entire piece of gear worth of fire resistance. Now, yes, it doesn't stack with the totem anymore, but if the totem goes offline, you still have Mark of the Wild. And I know what you're gonna say. Yes, there are purges in Molten Core. The most infamous, for lack of a better word, is Gar. Gar will purge your buffs, but I do not see that as a big issue, because first of all, you are probably gonna have the fire totem on that fight anyway, so what are the chances that both the shaman dies and you lose your buff? At that point, the fight went terribly wrong and it was gonna be a wipe anyway, and also he will only do it if you're in a certain range, so all the ranged DPSers and the healers are off the bat on this one. So you can make an argument that, well, maybe the melee should get 226 because of Gar, for Gar, and the rest should not worry about it. And that, okay, I can see that. Personally, I think that is griefing your raid. Besides, another thing, guys, every single buff you get decreases the likelihood that your Gift of the Wild is gonna get dispelled. So if you're stacking your food buff, your consumables, like every other buff, like intellect, whatever, you can have the warlocks do underwater breathing on you, for example. That's another buff. You can do the stealth detection. There is a lot of useless buffs that will get dispelled instead of Gift of the Wild. The shadow resistance from the priest, for example, there's a bunch. So yeah, even if you are in melee range, it is very unlikely that both you lose the totem and you lose Gift of the Wild, but okay, I will let it slide. People get really touchy on that one. If you want to do 226, you can do 226. There is, however, another big question. The question is, should you count the Flask of Chromatic resistance for the cap? First of all, if you want to be gold efficient, I would say yes, because the Flask of Chromatic resistance is much cheaper than any other flask that you can get, for the most part. But if you really want to go for the best in slot, I would say no. For a simple reason. Let's take the caster for example, but this is true for pretty much any other. The melees are the same case, a little more even. The Flask of Supreme Power is 150 spell power. If we take a look at the tier 1 set, the chest piece, the biggest part of the set, is only 40 spell power. So, and this is of course a very rough number, we're talking like a sacrifice of like 1 or even 2 pieces of gear worth of, because there is more than spell power on the gear of course, but we're sacrificing like 1 or even 2 pieces of gear worth of spell power for not taking this flask. But there are several pieces of fire resistance that got 25 resistance. So pound per pound, your normal flask is gonna be more valuable than the chromatic resistance flasks. However, I think that argument doesn't even count if you really wanna min-max it, because in theory you can get your normal flask and the Juju Ember at the same time. The Juju Ember is only 15 and not 25, but it is still something that stacks with your flask, so you can get the best of both worlds. That's the most optimal way to parse. Of course, the Juju Ember only lasts 10 minutes, so if you're in a good guild that kills the boss fast, it's not an issue, but for everybody else it might be. For the sake of this video, we're we're gonna do the Juju Ember route because that is objectively the most value you can get. We're gonna write it down on the good old ML's paint so I don't forget, and I am gonna do it on Comic Sans because people get super upset when I do that. We gotta hit 226 fire resistance with like our buffs that do not count the totem. Once again, the totem is not reliable for almost anybody except the top of the top of the top. We're gonna take out the 15 from the Juju Ember, and we're gonna take out 27 from the Mark of the Wild. And now all we need is 184. Of course, it obviously doesn't end there because we also need to take into account the enchantments, because no matter what gear you're wearing, you can always enchant it and skip this whole thing. Of course, you get the Exalted Enchant at Argent Dawn, that is 15 now, so we gotta get 169, nice. And there is also the 2 Librams. There is a Libram for the helmet and a Libram for the legs, and that is 14 total, of course, 20 and 20. So now we only gotta get 129. There is also the new Cloak Enchant from Hydraxian Waterlords, that's another 20, so that is 109. And that's pretty much it, that's our goal right there. We gotta get 109 unbuffed at least of the bad guys. As you can see, the fire resistance value for the entirety of tier 1 if you get the entire set is only 61, so you would still be missing like 50 fire resistance if you get full tier 1, and that's the main issue. A little later, because I forgot, I am also gonna drop a Wikora in the Discord in the raid related section of the Wikoras that is gonna warn you if at any point you are under 226 fire resistance, just in case you mess something up. You're gonna know very soon, so I guess that's useful. And it gets even more complicated because for the most part you wanna get your 6-piece set bonus. There is very few classes that get a truly useless 6-piece, and there is a lot of off pieces that are very good. For example, the Onslaught Belt, okay? If you're a plate user and you're a melee, you gotta get Onslaught Belt, it's not a choice. Now, luckily or unfortunately, depending on your viewpoint, most cloaks in the game are almost useless. They got like 20 agility, something like that. You can do without them, and there is a very strong cloak you can get. This blue cape from Ubers, the 20 resistance cape, might suck if you look at it, but 25 resistance is more value than anything you can get off another cape. At most you're losing 20 stats, and in this case the cape doesn't count for any tier set bonus, so we're not gonna have to replace any armor that we gotta use for the set bonuses or anything. I would say Wildfire Cape is the way to go. I guess we're gonna start with leather first because we're a druid. Remember, we gotta hit 109. Thankfully, we got a little bit of a cheat code here. We can spy on what the top rank 1 parsers in the world are doing for hit 3, and that's gonna save us a lot of time here. Now, in the case of feral druids, they are not going for the 6th set, but however, I am gonna go for the 6th set because most specs wanna get that 6-piece set. Of course, if you don't, that's a lot more flexibility for you. So we are gonna prioritize all the set pieces that do not have an alternative that has very high fire res. And that of course is pretty easy. First of all, we're gonna get the helmet, we're gonna get the boots, we're gonna get the belt, the bracers, the gloves. That is only 5-piece. And this is where leather users get into a bit of trouble. We need one more set piece to get the 6-piece bonus for all the leather users, but at the same time, the shoulders, the legs, and the chest are all really good pieces for fire resistance. Basically, there is gonna be 2 approaches for you. If you are a caster or a healer, we're talking Resto Druids, we're talking Boomkins, you can take the Volcanic Breastplate and the Volcanic Shoulders. They each have 25 fire resistance and there is the 10 set bonus on it, and you're gonna take the tier 1 pants. The 2 masterwork pieces together, they are 25 and 25 plus 10 from the bonus. We're talking 60 fire resistance you're getting right there. And the rest of your tier 1 set is enough fire resistance that you're actually gonna go over the cap a little bit. However, in the case of healers in particular, this doesn't apply to Boomkins. They only got 1 good ring, guys. So in their case, it is actually worth it to take 1 chest piece right here. For your tier 1, you can even get rid of 1 tier 1 piece if you feel like it. You can still have enough for resistance cap. And take the Tidal Loop. It is not a great ring, but it is 25 resistance and it has some decent stats. You're still gonna be 10 over the threshold we gotta get, but that's not gonna get wasted because you're not gonna hit the cap with this. The goal was hitting 226, and with Mark of the Wild and Juju Embers, we're gonna be well over that. However, if you are a melee, we're talking feral tanks, feral DPS, and rogues, that's gonna make things a little more complicated because of the Devil Core set. These Devil Core pieces are essentially best in slot. They got a lot of good stats and they got a lot of fire resistance on top, so we cannot really skip them. It is 15 on the gloves and we're gonna take the pants, which is yet another 10 and 10 from the bonus. We're talking 35 fire resistance right here. And as you can see, we are barely below the cap already. Now, luckily, since we are talking melee in particular, we got a couple aces up our sleeve. First of all, we're gonna be taking the Onyxia Tooth pendant. and that's gonna give us 10 more resistance, so we are gonna get to the 109 threshold just fine. But that's not it actually, because if you are a druid, this is only for feral druids. Oh, this is cute. This ruined all the suspense. It turns out you cannot equip pole arms on the gear planner yet. They forgot to update it, I guess. Druids can now equip pole arms, and the new reputation from Thorium Brotherhood is gonna give you another 15 fire resistance, and yes, that is gonna be your best in slot weapon for hit level 3. Now if we take the shoulders and the glaive, which I cannot show you here of course, we can actually get rid of the cape. We can just put on a normal cape, and thanks to the extra 15 fire resistance from the weapon in the case of feral druids, you're gonna get just over the 109 threshold, namely by exactly 5 points. So that's gonna be the tightest you can get. Of course, Sulfuras has 20 fire resistance. We are not gonna count Sulfuras. It is so hard to get that it is not reasonable for almost anybody to get it, but that's something you can consider too. But that means every other slot is just free to get, guys. Cloth users are gonna have it the hardest, by the way. Their fire resistance pieces are called the Flare Corset, and they are actually pretty decent. There is a potential of 4 total pieces: the shoulders, the robe, the bracers, the gloves, and the leggings. Now we are gonna discard the bracers right away because they did not get updated with SoD, so their stats are terrible, but we still got 4 other pieces. Sadly, for the case of DPS, this is not actually a thing for healers, but if you're a DPS mage or at Warlock, your belt is already spoken for. That's gonna be the Timbermo belt. It is simply best in slot. Thankfully, your cloak is also gonna have fire resistance on it. That's gonna be the Brilliant Chromatic Cloak. It got updated for SoD, and it has crit and spell power on it, and it has 8 fire resistance on it, so you cannot miss with this one. Also, from Onyxia, you're gonna get the Dragon Slayer Signet. This is not quite best in slot, but it is, I kid you not, 5 less stats than the best in slot one, and it is 10 fire resistance, so in hit 3 for most people you're gonna be taking this one. It's just too good to pass up. But this means if we wanna get 6 Ps, in the case of the mage it is useless, but there are casters, except for example the priest, that have a very useful 6 Ps. You only have 5 remaining slots to get your tier 1 in. Thankfully the belt has very low fire resistance anyway, and the shoulders are also very crappy for that, so we're gonna take everything else. As you can see, we got all the way up to 65, we got the 6 piece, and we still can get the shoulders, which are a nice comfortable 25 fire resistance. Luckily, if you're a clotty, you can also use a wand, and there is an excellent wand, the Crimson Shocker, which is another 10 resistance on top of that. But sadly, here is where you're gonna have to compromise something. Now you can take, for example, the Tidal Loop, the other ring you can get here, also from the Hydraxian quest, but this one is gonna be a problem because most casters rely on the ring to get the hit cap, except mages, because they just can't get away with it. But on the other hand, I think the best choice is to go for the trinket. Your best in slot trinkets are the Ephemeral Power one and the Briarwood Reed. You know, that twig that Jet drops, and both of them are like 30 spell power if you take into account the uptime and whatnot. A little more of course, but whatever. But the new trinket, the Fire Extinguisher, is a whopping 20 fire resistance, and it can get rid of harmful fire effects. There are a couple mechanics you can circumvent with that. For example, the Conflagration Fear that you get, that's technically a fire effect, and you are only sacrificing 30 spell power. The hit chance is not in jeopardy, and you're not sacrificing crit or stamina or anything important like that. So I would go for this one. You can even take off the wand if you want, but all the wands are absolutely useless. They got some intellect and spell power, and that's it. I guess I chose a bad example for the mage because the mage doesn't go for 6 pieces, so you can just get rid of 2 pieces, and if you are the mage you're gonna have to because your entire set has no freaking hit on it. So that's little caveat, but if you're a priest or if you're a warlock, your set will have hit on it, and with a necklace and the ring and one trinket you should be able to hit the hit cap just fine. Very well, now let's talk about mail. Now mail, because they can wear leather, they are gonna have a very easy time getting cap. If you're a melee DPS or a tank, you're gonna go for Devil Core, and that's 45 fire resistance off the bat. Everything else is gonna be your tier 1. We're also gonna get the Onyxia Pendant, but we are still exactly 10 fire resistance away. Now mail was actually the hardest for me to figure out. The WoW head guide is wrong. I checked the best in slot list and they are 10 fire resistance short, which is the same problem you're seeing here. This is why I wanted to make this video in the first place. There is no good resource to get like an actual best in slot guide here for that, but basically you got a couple options. I will not sacrifice a trinket. You got Hand of Justice, that is the best for every single melee. Actually wait, the Hunter also has the Hand of Justice equivalent now, so they also cannot sacrifice it. And the other one is the Breath, is 2% crit. You can't skip 2% crit, guys. You just got no choice here. The trinkets are off the table. Now as you can see right there, you're also missing 2% 100% hit. Luckily, hunters with their talents only need 3% hit because they are going survival, so that's not gonna be a problem for them, and that means that if you're a hunter, you can actually sacrifice a ring. If you're a hunter, you can take Ocean Breeze and be done with it. Oh, I forgot actually, the hunters can get a polearm, the same polearm, and it is 1% crit, which is not great, but it has a lot of agility anyway, and it is 15 fire resistance, so they can skip the cape and also go for that if they want. But if you're melee, you cannot really sacrifice the rings. They got 1% hit and 1% crit, both of them. So that brought me to the conclusion that the only reasonable solution is, once again, the Wildfire Cape. And bada boom, bada ba, you're over the threshold once again. You're safe. It is very expensive, but that's probably the most efficient way to do it if you're a ranged hunter. Now, if you are a male caster or healer, so elemental and Resto Shaman, basically, you're gonna have a much easier time because the Devil Corset is not a 10. So, to not spoil you anything, off the bat, we're gonna go for the shoulders, Volcanic Shoulders once again, and we're gonna take the Volcanic Leggings. That's 65 resistance off the bat. Everything else is gonna be our tier 1, and there you go, you're at the cap. If you are elemental in particular, your best in slot ring is gonna be the Dragon Slayer Signet, which is 10 more fire resistance. But sadly there is no more efficient way of getting rid of something else and getting back to the 109 threshold. You are gonna perpetually be 10 over the cap. I guess it's gonna help, I mean, it's not wasted. I say cap when I mean threshold for the 226, but you know what I mean. You're gonna be fine, that's what I would do. Finally, the one that everybody is waiting for, Plate. Now almost everybody, taking apart Paladin healers, who are gonna have it the easiest because they can just equip the Dark Iron helmet and they get way over the cap. Tanks and melees in general got a bunch of items that are spoken for, and that's actually 2 items, the Lionheart helmet and the Onslaught Girdle. These 2 are gonna be your best in slot pretty much forever, so yeah, get used to them, they are not going away. And your 6-piece set is actually super good, so you gotta get that 6-piece, so that's an easy answer. You gotta get everything else on tier 1 here, and you're gonna get to a nice gold 44 fire resistance. To that, there is another challenge, and that is that both your trinkets are spoken for. If you're a DPSer, you gotta get your Diamond Flask and your Hand of Justice, and if you're a tank, you're probably gonna get the Bread instead, the 2% crit, but either case, your trinkets are also off the table here, and there is no best in slot weapon with fire resistance for you, unless you wanna grief the hell out of your guild and get Sulfuras and say that you're gonna do 200 from now. That's not gonna happen. You can get the Dark Iron Destroyer. It is a decent weapon, but it is nowhere near the best. Of course, we're gonna be taking the Pendant, but as you can see, we are facing a problem here. If we are wearing our best in slot gear, they have too much gear. We're going 2% over the cap, and we could really use getting rid of one of these pieces to get fire resistance, but we do not want to get rid of Might because that is the 6-piece that we need. And sadly, and I mean, people are gonna get happy about that because that's gonna save you guys a bunch of money. It turns out that the best way to get fire resistance and not be over the hit cap, this thing has 2% hit on it for some reason, the Lionheart Helm. So if we get rid of this and we get the Dark Iron set, which has a whopping 40 fire resistance, we are already all the way to 94 now. And we didn't waste a lot of stats. Actually, there was 2% hit that was going to waste anyway. But we are still 15 fire resistance away from the cap, of course. So this is gonna be where it gets interesting. You could, of course, get the Wildfire Cape, which is 20, but you will be sacrificing this cape from Majordomo, which is 21 strength and 9 agility. Now that is about 0.5% of crit and like 40 attack power or something like that. On the other hand, for the ring, we can get Ocean's Breeze, which is a 20 resistance and you get 22 attack power, not too bad. But to get that, we would be sacrificing the Pain Weaver Band, which is 1% crit and 16 attack power, or the Quick Strike Ring, which is 1% crit and 36 attack power. Now, I know what you're gonna be saying, what about Don Julio's? The problem with Don Julio's is that you're wasting the hit. It is almost as good, and if you can get it, you may shuffle something around or something because it is so good. But since we are over the hit cap, this is gonna be like 16 attack power less, guys, which I think is kinda funny. But if you consider everything, the one that wins out, or loses out, you can say, is the Wildfire Cape. If you go Wildfire Cape and you take the other 2 rings, you're gonna gain 0.5% crit and you're gonna lose 13 attack power. For most people, 0.5% crit is going to be a little more than 13 attack power. It is very close, okay? Once again, if you do not want to use the Wildfire Cape or for whatever reason, I don't know, it is very close. So either one, if you want to go for Ocean's Breeze because you don't have the Quick Strike Ring yet, and that way you can use the Good Cloak instead, you're going to be almost the same. But mathematically speaking, the cape is going to be a little better. Jeez, that was a long one. What is it? 90 minutes recording. Of course, I'm going to cut it down, but oof. As you can see, the fire resistance problem is not as simple as you might think. And keep in mind, any guide, even this guide, you cannot really take at face value because it only takes missing one item for your entire slots to shuffle so you can meet the threshold, which is kind of annoying. But I hope this can give you a little guidance of what it means to be doing hit 3. In the best case scenario, you're gonna be always be missing 2 pieces of gear. And I simply see no good reason why it should be this way, guys. Once again, I plead to Blizzard to please buff the fire resistance values. Even if they gave 40 more fire resistance to the entire tier 1 set, that would be about enough to push it over the edge and make it so we are not missing anything best in slot. Okay, maybe the off pieces, you're gonna be missing all slot gear doll or something, but you're gonna be wearing full tier 1 and you're gonna be like the best you can be. So yeah, it's a bit of a bummer, I don't know, just the feeling that you can try as much as you want, you can get every single piece of gear that the best in the game, and you're still gonna get punished by 2 pieces. I don't know, it doesn't sit well with me, guys. Subscribe, join the Discord, and thank you for watching.